Welcome to another episode of Get Your Fill, Financial Independence and Long Life, where we explore ways to achieve those two goals. And, if you're trying to achieve the goal of financial independence by being an entrepreneur or just for any kind of way, I have a feeling that today's guest is going to be helpful to you no matter where you're at, because Victoria Pelletier she's an award-winning executive leader. She's a #1 best-selling author, and we're going to talk about that she has some books coming out in 2024. She's an in-demand professional public speaker, corporate exec, board director, entrepreneur, social seller, public brander, worldwide LinkedIn. Wait a minute. Okay, we'll cut that out. #1 social seller public brand worldwide per LinkedIn for her F500 employers. She is sought out for discussions on motivation, diversity, equity, inclusion, women in leadership, culture, workforce, and more. She's unstoppable and dynamic, born to lead and not to be led. That is it. That's what we're looking for. Hey, Victoria, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
So let's start off with, I guess I want to talk a little bit about your journey. First of all, like, how did you become have all these many hats and accolades and all this wonderful press?
I describe myself as a multi-potentialite, and meaning that I like a multitude of diverse things. So I have almost always, as a kid, I worked multiple jobs. And then as an executive, I've almost always had a side hustle or some passion project that I may or may not have chosen to monetize. And that's where it's come from. But I'd be remiss, Christina, if I didn't sort of tell the audience a little bit of the story of why. Like, what's the origin story? People are always trying to understand. They're like, I hate the question, how do you have it all? You don't, all at the same time. Compromises and trade-offs, but how to, like, and why did I achieve even my first executive role at such an early age? And it's because I come from like really difficult and humble beginnings. I was born to a drug-addicted teenage mother who was exceptionally abusive to me, went in and out of the child welfare system. Fortunate, however, at age 4 to be adopted. And so in a non-abusive, loving household, but one that was much lower from a socioeconomic standpoint. So no vacations for me, couldn't go on some of the school field trips. And I started working at 11. I share that because that is my why. I was determined. I don't think I had the vernacular. I wouldn't have said it as a child, but I remember my mom said to me when I was 11, she's like, Tori, you need to do better than us. And she meant education, vocationally, but she didn't have to, because I was determined I'd be better than Julie, my biological mother, the biology or the circumstance that I was, living in. And so that's what's like pushed me so hard to do more and be better, a better version of myself consistently.
That's fantastic. And that's it, right? You could have taken another path. You could have just felt sorry for yourself for the rest of your life. You could have just said, oh, what difference does it make? Look at here's all my reasons and all my excuses of why I can't succeed. But you're just like, no, screw that. I know you, because you have it in you, right?
Yeah.
But that takes a self-confidence that I think I really applaud you for developing that self-confidence and for evolving to that point when you probably didn't have any positive role models in that respect, right? I mean, even now we struggle to find women role models.
Yeah, it's really true. I think I think there's a little bit, people will say, like, is it like I've become very resilient, and I think I've learned lessons to have a healthy way of being resilient. It wasn't always healthy, building walls around yourself is not like the healthy way to do it. But there was this desire I signed my social media posts with 2 hashtags all the time. One is unstoppable and the other is no excuses. And that is in that, although I've learned better ways to be resilient, I still think there's something innately in my DNA. Fight or flight, I'm a fighter. And so I was never going to let any obstacle or challenge or adversity stop me from achieving what I wanted to. And no, I didn't have role models. In fact, I even think in career, like in business, most of my role models have been the opposite of what you think. They've been horrific leaders, unethical in some cases, they've been examples of who I wanted to be nothing like. So in fact, I just chose to do the opposite.
Yeah.
And so I've tried to be the kind of person whether it's as a parent or in business, the kind of person that like I would want to work for, or I would want to be, a family member or friend to.
Yeah. And that's so fantastic. I mean, and that's, every single day we can make that, we're going to have some things thrown up at us and it's going to be like, okay, what do I want to do with this? Do I want to use it as fuel? Do I want to use it as an example of what not to do? Or do I want to just allow it to slow me down and give me another excuse not to meet my goals and achieve what I want to achieve?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
tell a lot of people, I'm like, you're the CEO of brand you, insert your name. And
Yeah.
so in terms of, achieving what you want, the no excuses, like again, stuff's gonna happen to us. We can't prevent challenge or adversity comes our way. What we can choose is how we react and respond and move forward from there.
Absolutely. That's absolutely right. So now let's go kind of maneuver into maybe some ways of I'm thinking of like advice that you could give to people and things that that people are going to run up against when they're just starting a new business. Let's start with that from the branding perspective.
Oh, yeah. When I shifted while I was in university, I worked in a bank, and then when I got recruited to be the COO of a BPO, an outsourcing organization, the shift into a B2B environment was where I recognized the importance of brand. Again, 20 something years ago, I don't think I was calling it that, but it was more around how do I make the organization, myself as the leader, and my go to market, my client facing teams different. Like people do business with people they like and trust and
Yeah.
want to do business with. And so I think that's important for your listeners, is to really think about, first of all, I mean, I'm sure all of them have found the right product or service for which there's a market for.
Hopefully.
And
That's not
um,
always, you don't always do that first out of the gate, but let's just
no,
assume that that's already in place.
right. And hopefully, particularly as an entrepreneur, hopefully you're passionate about it as well. And then from there, I think we need to the brand perspective. What I find so many people fall short with is thinking that your individual brand has to do with the job title, the company, the industry, or the job function that you're known for. Like, but that's just the foundational piece. It's so much more than that. So I say there's like four pieces to how we think about brand and how we show up. And so the first is the one that's described at your subject matter expertise. Again, super foundational. And then for the entrepreneurs listening, I mean, that's also connected to the business and not just them as the individual. But then the next is the storytelling, the what makes you unique in that people want to have a hook to get to know you. So what are your values? What are the interests that you have, the passions that you will mutually share with people who want to engage, buy, or work for you? And then the next one is, how are you different? So there's lots of people that are executives in the space that I'm in and maybe have some of the same shared values, but why would they hire me versus someone else? What makes me different? So for me, for example, I'm radically candid. And in a world of consulting and technology and services professionals, oftentimes these consultants just tell clients what they want to hear. I found that is not me. There's no meeting after the meeting. Cards are on the table. For example, I told a CEO doing a big reorganization, supporting him through last year, I'm like, Patrick, I don't think you hired me or my team to tell you what you wanted to hear, as I then went and poked holes in some of the people you wanted to put in different spots. That's a big part of how I am different. So I'd encourage your audience to get clear on that as well. And the last is, what do you want to be known for? What's the kind of impact or legacy that you would want to leave behind? And so for me, who's done like 18 mergers and acquisitions in my career and have made lots of money for the companies I worked for, that's not going to be on my literal or figurative tombstone, right? It's going to be about who I was as a whole human. Did I leave the world in a better place than when I joined it? The kind of things that I advocate for around social justice and equity and inclusion and those kinds of things.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's important to figure those things out. I feel like if you know that, if you've got that going in, for example, I met a woman on Saturday and she started a business because her sister was killed as in a relationship with domestic violence. And so that's why she started the business. That's her why. That's a big part of it. But if you don't have an experience like that, if you don't have a big, huge life-changing event, if you just really were just looking around for something to do and you were, became interested in something, or even if you're just really passionate about a particular technology, or, I bought this thing, I'm selling this thing because I bought it and I thought it was wonderful, right? Something a little more simple and not quite so, tied to your whole life experience, then we might put that to the side a little bit. We might not even take the time to dig down and figure out what that is. Any ideas or suggestions or thoughts on how people can get to the bottom of, like, what is it about what I'm doing in this industry or what I'm doing in my life that I want people to say about me when I leave the room, or what that I want people to understand about me?
I have a phrase that I use pretty frequently, and that is strategic intentionality. And so the advice I would give is to be really strategic about how you're curating, narrating that brand. And as I say curating, I want to be clear. It's not a false character. We're not showing up as actors on stages. It is authentically us. But the tank tops that I wear to the gym that may have funny sayings, some of which have expletives on them, I'm not putting that on my LinkedIn profile, right? That'll go on my personal Instagram feed. And so that's what I mean by being like strategic and intentional. And so I'd say there's there's also a lot of like self-awareness and reflection that needs to be done to get to, as you said, kind of to the bottom of that. And so there's, at one point in my career, I showed up all business all the time. I was not going to show as a young female executive. I was not going to show people that I was vulnerable or I even really had emotions. And so I got a nickname as the Iron Maiden, and that shocked me because it's actually not who I am, but perception becomes reality. And so for me, I needed to pivot. I needed to be really intentional about showing up in a very different way. And what I would also say is it's really important to find people who will be radically candid with you. Say, I think you develop, here's the strategy and the approach I want to take in terms of how I show up. How does that resonate with you? Like, would you believe that? Do I need to do something different? What's your perception today? And so I think going through all of that will help significantly. And then in terms of how do you forge forward in showing up in a very different way from a strong brand perspective.
Yeah. And I guess I want to go back a little bit because I wonder if everybody understands what branding encompasses, right? We just think of like your logo or whatever. I mean, what is branding? When you think about branding, how would you describe it to people who have no idea?
Well, I actually, the easiest way to do it is to liken it to a company brand,
Mm-hmm.
where I talk about it is the feeling and the reflection of experience that's left in the mind of, let's say, the consumer. So when you see the Nike swoosh, right, like that elicits something. Starbucks. So I'm actually originally from Canada, so like Tim Hortons is the coffee chain of choice, but there's a very different experience in the way I view Tim Hortons versus Starbucks, where you would come and you would sit and you would gather with people, right? So that's what I describe it for people. That yes, when we think about us as personal brands, our great beautiful profile photo is the reflection of that, of whatever kind of logo we think of for companies. But it's about what is that brand, that logo, our face, what does that elicit in those that experience or engage with us? And so that's why I go back to, it's more than, oh, I'm the CEO of this company, or I know a lot about this industry. Okay, that's one thing. That doesn't create anything or give me an idea about who you are as a person, create this feeling or experience, and therefore people who want to work or buy from you.
And what you said about intentionality it's so true because, like, okay, so one of my little hats is I have a co-working space. So it's a place where it's called a co-working community. It's where I want the community to gather. It's where, right, the same kind of thing, what you talk about with Starbucks, like people go there because they want to break bread with people. They want to share a cup of coffee with people. They want to interact rather than just sitting at home alone all the time. And intentionally wanted that to be a place that felt good to people, that felt inclusive, where everybody felt like they were welcome. And so I had to think about that. Like when I would put out, we took a picture at a gathering and every single face looked similar. And I said, well, that is not going to, when people look at this, they're not going to feel like, hey, this is a place where I'd be welcome to come. So I need, that just needs to be in your mind every single day, right? It's easy as a white person just to look at the picture and not really see anything wrong because everybody else in the picture is white. But actually, how is this going to be perceived when other people view that? They're going to see like, oh, nobody there looks like me. It's not a place for me. And even from the perspective of like, recycling and, like things like that, like we care about the environment here. And every time I do something, I'm like, no, don't bring your paper plates. We have real plates and, don't bring plastic stuff. And, like,
Yeah.
it just has to continue to be something that you don't just throw it out there is what I'm saying, right? You have to live it and embrace it and actually, and is that not always that easy for people to do, right? I mean,
It's not. I think when we're talking about the human or personal brand, there's a lot of fear, I think, for many people in what I think just people are going, oh, like there's two different networks or people I engage with. There's my professional network and there's my personal network. And maybe I have one from like hobbies or event, whatever. My philosophy, first of all, it's all just life. So there's just one. But the fear is like, what part of me do I bring in? Like, are they, for me early on too, there was a significant amount of fear and rejection. And that again goes back to some of my youth. And so, but it informed the way in which I showed up. So
yeah,
actually, I think me telling a story makes other people recognize, okay, like I've had some challenge and adversity. I can do it too, number one. But two, explaining that this is how sometimes it manifests for me. Like again, it just creates this incredible bond. So
yeah,
I I believe that if we do not lean into the things that make us uncomfortable, growth will not come.
yeah. Yeah. And there's a million adages, right, that say that exact thing. So there's no denying. It's not a subject that I'm going to debate for sure. I 100% agree with you. But I think, I guess thinking about ahead of time and making sure that it's not just, for example, you say, okay, my clients are going to be millennials and they care about this. And so that's what we're going to talk about. But if that's not really who you are, it's
Well,
not, it's going to be a real challenge, right?
right. And Christine, there's how you market the product or service is like, and so that's a big part of the organizational's branding, the product or service branding in speaking to those that would actually buy it. But then you think about and so there's two elements. There's again, the brand for the company, to your point around co-working space, like you want to show up in a very certain way to create that experience. But then we as humans, as well, that are selling to, hiring, or buying from others as well, need to, very much, think about that as well. And so then I go back to the authenticity piece. And so I would hope the fact that I'm radically candid, I'm extremely values driven, I'm focused on building what I refer to as whole human leadership and great culture in workplaces, that transcends where I work for, and should resonate with any buyer type of the product, or well, I should say any. There might be some who say no, and I'm like, well, maybe we don't work together, and
Yeah.
that's okay. Like I'm looking to build a relationship for long term.
Yeah. Well, and that's it. In a way, you want to put your marketing out there in such a way that people self-select, right? Like, they might not say to themselves, oh, I don't want somebody who's going to be radically candid, but they're just going to say, oh, no, I like this other person better, right? And they don't need to tell themselves, I don't really want the truth
Right, right.
in so many words, but that they're just going to self-select. This isn't a person who, they're not speaking my language, right? Which is
Right.
perfect, which is exactly perfect. So now I want to pause because I had this really great question. And then I just like totally, sorry.
Oh, no
Let me
worries.
think about this for a second. Thank God for freaking editing. I don't know how people do like live stuff.
Oh, I do so much media work like all the time. I'm media trained, but it doesn't mean that every once in a while you don't still mess up. Again, we're humans. Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, well, and then somebody knocks at the door and you're like, oh no, this is live. I can't talk to you. And I was just thinking about, let me just go back there because it was when you were talking about your clients and people, how you're speaking to them and they're choosing you because of what you say and not choosing you because of what they say, which is perfect. But I wanted to evolve the message, like come out of branding and go into the next. Oh, creating. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I'm back. Sorry. I had to talk myself back to what I was thinking about for them. So, as entrepreneurs, as we're starting our businesses and starting our organizations, and, just like, okay, it's time for us to hire our first person, how can we also be intentional and like you just hire somebody because whatever, I'm just going to hire my friend or I'm hiring this person because they were the cheapest one on the block or but I guess what I want to say is you can accidentally end up with a specific culture that you might not have really wanted, or that might now you're looking at your business and saying, all right, hold on. This isn't right. This isn't really what I meant. I didn't, now I've got these people and it just doesn't feel good to me and I don't know how to fix it. How can we avoid that right out of the gate by growing our business in a very intentional way so that we don't end up having to call you? Not that people shouldn't call you, they should totally call you, but so that they're not like saying, shit, this business is awful. And what am I going to do? Like, what can we do to avoid that?
The phrase I said I like a lot, strategic intentionality, is also incredibly important and applicable here in that what I see many companies do is they'll create like a mission, vision, values statement, and might even state, here's our company culture. And so, although that's intention in terms of aspiration, and this is what we're looking to achieve,
Yeah.
then comes the strategic nature around this. And there's no magic silver bullet at all to solve for that. Culture, in my opinion, is the outcome of the language, the actions, the behaviors, supporting the policies that have been written within the organization, and thinking about what does that look like, going back to your co-working space. And if like the advertisements all Caucasian people, like it demonstrates something. And so there's intentionality around how we show up, again, language, action, behavior. And I also think about that from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective. So if we say we want this kind of culture, then we need to hold our leaders accountable to that. Everyone in the organization, quite frankly. There's so many times I see companies keep their toxic top performers because they sell for them, but they're horrific and no one wants to work with them. Well, you don't actually truly believe that this is the kind of culture you want if you're going to allow that individual to stay in the organization. You're not going to hopefully coach them and develop them to improve, but if it doesn't, you need to move them out of the organization. Yeah. And then around diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's, as you said, people want to hire their friends or in people they know or refer to them, but you need to be very intentional about looking at your workforce, like the place in which you're starting from. And I mean, gender is the easy one, and it's because it's like it's in every HR system. It's usually optional self-disclosure for things like sexuality and race and religion and all those things. But to the extent that you can, evaluate your starting point and make a commitment to move the needle forward to advance. And you need to weave that through everything that you do, from not just attracting diverse talent, for example, making it a place in which they feel included, a sense of belonging, and therefore they want to stay. And so going back to that strategic intentionality, but with data to help support, like where are we today? And then asking feedback ongoing is super important as well.
Yeah. And actually, I don't know, I think this is still your kind of area, but you can tell me if you don't want to answer the question or if it's not really your forte. But how can you have that conversation with your employees to help? How can you make that an open door or even an open book? Like, how do I go up to a person and say, do you feel comfortable working here? Or what could we do to make you feel more right? I mean, how it just seems awkward. How do you go about that?
And both companies rely upon the engagement surveys, like employee surveys. The challenge with that is as much as they tell employees they're anonymous, I will tell you a majority of the time they are not. And so, which to me is really, it's quite sad. But employees don't trust that it's anonymous, and rightfully so in many instances. And so they don't share like, honest feedback.
Yeah.
And so I think it takes, trust with leaders in the organization that gets built over time for them to feel confident sharing, or the right kind of leader to ask those questions. And then, I mean, if you get in much larger organizations, there's a lot that can be done, from a employee sentiment, let's say, collection. So almost all companies have some kind of collaboration tool, whether it's Teams or Slack or whatever.
Yeah.
So I've worked for a large tech company, but they looked at the digital footprint of all of its employees for a multitude of, and some really good reasons, identifying new skills they might not have listed, but we know that they have because how they engage and what they do in our platform. But it also looks at sentiment for people who are like chatting in these channels. And so there's ways to get at, I don't love that option, to be honest, Christine. I don't. I'm just saying again, I want to start from a place of like as much data and fact as possible, and then find the right kind of leaders and build some safety, whether it's through employee resource groups or other truly anonymous to the extent that you can, or even if it's not really, but never really using any identifiable information when coming back to the team.
Yeah, giving people just like a number identifier or something that you're not gonna, I don't know how, it's hard to, but you're right. I mean, the data's there. So if you can just kind of, I don't know, because I'm kind of going back to this idea of when you're starting your business, that because you touched on something that's even more important, right? That you're hiring people that who look like you, who think like you. So that's another problem, right? If everybody sort of, you really want to hire somebody, like I used to do project management. And whenever I would work with a project manager on the other side who really was a pain in the ass, I knew that they'd be really good at their job because, oh God, this person's just such a nuisance. They're always calling me and calling, but that's right. That person's going to be fantastic, but I'm not necessarily going to like them. Right? Because they have a different personality. They're so detail oriented. And I'm like a big picture. And so you get all these big picture people and no one's doing the details. Like, wow, that's can be really challenging. And that can be death to an organization, right? When you're just starting out.
It can, and that's where I try and like coach or educate people on recognizing that diverse workforce, and by there's so many like elements of diversity. Again, it's
Yeah.
not just gender and race and sexuality and all those sorts of things. Even from a work perspective of the kind of experience, I find like many hiring managers and recruiters for sure are like myopically focused on who has had this exact same job at a competitive company, rather than recognizing like we're trying to transform and do something very different. So let's look for people with different experience, different industries, different maybe countries around the world that they've worked in.
Yeah.
That is not just creating diversity. It's not just the right thing to do. The reality is it's incredibly good for business. It's going back to like data and fact. It's been proven that there's higher like problem solving, greater innovation. Even when we look at boards of companies, the the risk ratings and what happens when you have a diverse board, like it drives top and bottom line benefit, not to mention makes it a great place for us to be working.
Yeah. It's a great point. When in my investment club, when we're looking at stock companies to invest in, if, we look at the board and every single person there is like 70 years old, you're thinking how good could they be, right? A whole board full of old white men. How good could they really be at staying on top of like the, the kinds of changes that are coming when everything's happening so fast? I just, they're going to be here's a huge stereotype. I think they're going to be more cautious. I think they're going to be more resistant to change, right? Okay, so maybe that's putting everybody in a bucket, but I think it's probably a pretty accurate bucket.
Yeah, no, completely agree. It's going back to sort of being radically candid and open. So I'm in career transition right now. I left my last company a few months back. And as I'm looking for that next opportunity, and you exactly what you said, I looked at a recruiter contacted me for one company, and it's a middle-aged white guy who's hired all middle-aged white guys, mostly from his former company. Yet he's trying to transform, per the recruiter, he's trying to transform the business. So I'm like, but you're just hiring more of exactly the same.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I literally said to the recruiter, I'm like, this really concerns me. Before I meet with the CEO, I said, I need to understand his commitment to diversity and really looking to transform. And interestingly, I pulled myself out of the process recently because he's just demonstrated that
Yeah.
he's not committed to it. So I'm like, okay, much as I, want a job, I'm not going to choose that one because it's not aligned with who I am and the values and what I stand for.
Yeah. And I want to sort of be like devil's advocate, but not really. But he might not really even understand, right, what he's doing. Like, oh, I want to be different. Yeah, but how can you be different when you're bringing all the same stuff with you? Yeah, it's challenging, right? I mean, we don't know what we don't know, and we don't even, it probably never occurred to him. Like these are my golf buddies. They're really smart guys. This one's got a PhD and this one's got whatever. Like, uh-huh.
That's right.
I want to see like somebody in there who's doing graffiti and who's like, like 25 years old. And, I mean, yeah, but we all run that risk, right? We all run that risk when we're trying to build a beautiful, diverse, interesting business. And to bring someone in who's going to challenge our ideas, who's going to challenge our stereotypes and our paradigms and everything. That's just not that easy.
No, no, definitely not.
So you have a great forum here. Tell me, what is an ideal company? What's like your dream job? What do you like when you just sit up and say like, oh man, this is what it's going to look like?
I, having been now a C-suite executive for over 20 years, and in some cases, I didn't have the C title, but I was working for a Fortune 100 company and running a really large business unit for them. So I want to continue to do that. I like big, hairy, complex businesses and challenges to solve. I know that I'm not a startup girl. I know that I'm a scale and grow, transform, fix trouble businesses. That's all me. And so I look for, however, although I started after I came out of banking and some private companies, this last 15 or so has been really large public companies. And my preference would be to go into a smaller organization. Maybe it's a private equity, like portfolio company where I can leverage my M&A experience, my transformation experience in a place where I feel like I'll have much like more immediate impact because I'm not working through a huge matrix and I can leverage all my skills. And then, financially, there's some benefit to doing that as well. And there'll be an exit in a number of years, and then I would want to do it all over again. That's
Yeah.
a very, very networked community, though. And given I haven't worked in it, it'll be a bit more of a challenge for me. So I am realistic that, with two college age kids that are still very much on my payroll, that I need to continue working, that I may need to stay in Fortune 500 companies. And that's great too. In which case, I want it to be running a large P&L, a business unit or a market for them where I've got ideally end-to-end responsibility from how do we go to market through how do we, deliver, or the COO for the entire company, given I often run the shared services businesses. But much like the example I just gave you where I pulled myself out of the process, I will be very, very committed to looking for an organization that's got the right kind of values in its leadership team, and commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Doesn't have to be perfect, but
Yeah.
I want those that are committed to progress.
Right. Exactly. They might bring you in because they want to be better, but they actually have to want to be better. Not just because they want to tell somebody, oh, we've got a consultant working on that. Got somebody in that pocket. So, how about industry? Do you care? Like, do you want tech? Do you want like
I
things, or like what kinds of industries are you interested in? Do you care?
um No is the short answer, but I say that because I've had such exposure being in the world of professional services. I've had exposure to every industry. Now, that said, there's ones I know, exceptionally well. So professionals, and working for another professional services firm, although I don't want to work for the direct competitors of those that I worked for before. I
Right.
didn't love some of the culture and the way it operated. So for me, B2B, serving other, like in a B2B environment for sure, but that's still quite broad. I know financial services very well. I know technology well. And I know travel and hospitality. My preference leans more towards financial services and technology, or some other kind of like B2B services type organization. I could go back, my first exec role was in an outsourcing organization. I could go back into, doing something like that. So when I talk about professional services more broadly, but not the likes of where I just came from, it could be something like that.
Excellent. Well, I hope that somebody listening is thinking, "Ooh, wow, you mean we could snag this amazing, very talented person that we just happen to hear on this podcast, that she would be available? Oh my god, that would be amazing."
Yeah, awesome.
So, what else we can do, right, to start to bone up on all of our knowledge is to read some of the books that you have coming out. So tell us about that. Tell us about all the fun stuff that's happening in 2024.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I had previously co-authored a book called Unstoppable, which is like my philosophy and mantra. But I decided while I was in career transition, I'm like, now's the time for me. I have some capacity. So why don't I look to write a book? I couldn't decide between two topics. So I'm like, well, let's do both. So first one is around personal branding. And that one's going to be coming out early in 2024. And a few months later in the spring, I will have one coming out on whole human leadership, and which is my phrase, my words around, again, a very different kind of leadership approach, the authenticity and transparency and the way in which we engage with our employees.
And I feel like the time has really come for that, right? People just don't want the BS. They don't want the platitudes and all the crap, and then to see that there's nothing backing it up.
No, exactly. I mean, and this goes back to when I said, culture being the outcome of and how we hold our leaders accountable to language, action, behavior. Same thing. So like the platitudes, as you just said. And so we need to be really consistent. Then if this is who we say we are, what we want to, be or become, then we are consistent in how we show up, again, with language, action, behavior, or no one will believe it.
Yeah, with good reason. Yeah, I feel like the large businesses that I've worked for in the past have been just political, unhealthy, sort of like a bad relationship kind of thing where, there's just so much passive aggressive BS and right, all this like this happens in the front room and this happens in the back room and you just,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I had this example a number of years ago where I mentioned that like toxic top performer.
yeah.
So this was an individual who I actually don't even think he was like a super top performer. I saw his numbers, but somewhat protected within the organization. And he was just so horrific. He would change minutes, like change meetings 2 minutes before and rebook it without checking people's calendars. He would get on there and like put down people, swear at them. He was horrible. And so I remember my team were engaged on some deals with him. And I remember going to my leader and I'm like, look, need to talk about this individual. And she said, oh, there's been a lot of like HR, like complaints to HR and investigations. And she was just, again, somewhat protected status. So she was like, I can't really do it, even though he reported to her. And she's like, I can't really do anything. So I'm about control what you can control. So I said, well, so if the company's not prepared to exit someone who's so horrible to its employees, and in my opinion, not even like super top performer,
Right.
I said, then what I can control is the fact that my team will never work on any sales deal that he's involved in, period. And I know that he needs my team, but he'll have to find some alternatives. and so,
Great.
and that for me is standing up and protecting my team, showing who I am as a leader, trying to make change and movement and progress. And although I didn't have authority to exit him, I had authority over how I was going to support my team going forward.
Yeah, and that's fantastic. And you have to do that stuff, right? If everybody's just sucking it up and working with this horrific person, where's the, what's the, why should they bother to make a change that is probably going to be difficult and unpleasant for everybody, and lots of screaming and yelling and carrying on and lawsuits or whatever else the idiot might do, right? You're like, oh, it's just as easy to keep them. Well, cheaper to keep her, like that kind of thing. Cheaper to keep them. No, there has to be a consequence or nobody's going to be bothered.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's congratulations.
Thank you.
Standing up for it. Like, no, we're not taking your crap. Well, all right. Victoria, I feel like you've got so many different talents and so many different things that we could talk about and do, like that we could probably talk for another 6 or 7 hours, but that probably wouldn't be interesting for the podcast listeners. So tell me one thing that you would like to leave people with, a question you wish I would have asked, or just something that you want to make sure that people understand, or even just a tip or a piece of advice that you would give to entrepreneurs or people sort of just getting started who want to make sure they do this right, or at least try to do it right.
Yeah, that's tough to sort of leave with one thing. I will reiterate something that I said earlier around recognizing that, and I know lots of your listeners are founders and CEOs of their own organizations, but I go back to this phrase, and I say it for lots of people that are, in various stages of their career. You are the CEO of of your career, of not trusting it and putting it in the hands of others. And that goes back to being strategically intentional on the steps you want to take forward to progress, and that you have choice. So again, we're all going to face adversity and challenge at some point, but you have choice in terms of how you're going to respond to that. I'm deeply emotional, so I'm still going to cry at the beginning of it, but I'm going to make a decision that once the tears have flown, I'm going to like move forward and anchor back on what's the goal that I have for myself and what steps do I need to take. So I would just say, like, your audience, you can be your own version of unstoppable, which is how I choose to live.
And before I just want to jump on that a little bit, even though we're kind of winding down, but I just don't want to let this go, that what you're saying is relevant whether you have your own business or not, right? You're your own brand, even if you're just a little microcosm in this huge organization, and you could still know, if you know what you like, the decision that you made, where my team is not working with that guy. So that's your brand does not align with this person's behavior. So even though it's not your company, it doesn't have to be your company. It's just you as an individual. Your individual brand does not support this. This is not in my mission statement. I'm going to work with people like that. Then I'm going to put up with that kind of behavior, that people are going to talk to me that way. That's not going to work with me. So I'm not going to stand for it. Right. A lot of people just think, oh, I'm in this other, the reason they want to become an entrepreneur is because they're in this shit toxic environment and they just don't know how to deal with saying no to people and doing the hard stuff. But that's that's what you got to do. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. How can people reach you? How can they buy your new books? How can they get in touch with you? How can they offer you a great job?
Thank you. Thank you, Christine, for throwing that out there. The easiest, simplest way is I do have a website, which is victoria-pelletier.com. The existing book is out there. There'll be new landing pages to sort of pre-order soon for the new ones, but also people can choose to link out with me on whatever their preferred channel is. So LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, whatever. And a lot of the speaking work that I do will also be profiled there.
Excellent. Excellent. So now thank you very much for being with us, Victoria. And thank you, listener, for listening. And I hope you've thought of some great ideas first of all, I hope it's helped you to think about your business and yourself as a brand and how you want to show up in the world, whether you work for someone else, whether you work for yourself, whether you're running a team, whatever your particular niche is in life. But also, you've heard a lot of different things about that Victoria can offer, that she can do, that she can talk about. You can hear she's a very articulate speaker and an excellent, very nice human being. So who can you send this episode to? Why don't you think of 2 people that you can send this episode to that are really going to love and appreciate what Victoria has shared, and maybe want to hire her either to speak or to come and be part of their organization, or who knows what opportunities await.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next week.